When I was 10, Heelys were all the rage. Does anyone remember Heelys? They were the shoe that had a wheel at the heel. And they were so cool. You could walk in them, you could skate in them. They came in all sorts of colors, and everyone at school had a pair. Naturally, I felt pressure to join the bandwagon. I needed those shoes. So one day, I decided to ask my parents for a pair at dinner. How was your day at school, sweetie? I had an answer prepared. Oh, it was great, Mom and Dad. Look, I got an A+ on my math test, and I did so well during soccer practice, and I had such a great time with my friends at recess. But there was one little problem. What's wrong, they asked. They thought this would be an actual problem. In my head, this was an actual problem. Mom and Dad, I need a pair of Heelys. Everyone at school has a pair, and I can't be a loser. My dad looked at me and said, do you need a pair, or do you just want a pair? Dad, clearly the man didn't understand. Dad, I need a pair of Heelys. I can't be the only one without a pair. My parents tried reasoning with me. They tried telling me that true friends don't judge other friends for their shoes. They tried telling me that this was a passing trend. No one was going to remember this weeks from now. And they tried telling me, most importantly, I had plenty of other shoes to wear that were just as nice. But I was not hearing any of this. I needed those shoes. And I couldn't believe they were telling me no. So, out of desperation, I finally shouted, but that's not fair! Rather than give me the classic response, the one that goes, well, life is not fair, my parents decided to use this as a teaching moment. So the weekend arrives and my dad says, okay, get in the car, we're going shoe shopping. What? I won. I'm getting my Heelys. I was so excited. I could barely contain myself on the way there. And when we arrived, my dad said, okay, we're gonna get out of this car and we're gonna take a little walk. And you're gonna tell me which shoes catch your eye. Easy enough, right? But notice the choice of words. He didn't say, tell me which shoes you wanna buy. He said, tell me which shoes catch your eye. And I didn't make anything of this until we started walking, and I realized we're not at the mall. We're on Skid Row, an area in downtown Los Angeles with one of the highest homeless populations in the United States. But I continue to follow my dad's instructions, and I'm looking for the shoes that catch my eye, but all I can see are bare feet, feet with tattered shoes on them, feet with cardboard shoes, do-it-yourself shoes. And I look up and I see homes made out of tents, piles of blankets, roofs made out of cardboard. I didn't understand. I asked my dad, why? Why do they live like this? Why don't they have a home like we do? And my dad said, this is what it looks like when a person needs shoes because life is not fair. And I remember my dad's words of wisdom from that moment. He told me, if this makes you sad, help them. And in that moment, we made a commitment to help the people living under do-it-yourself roofs and wearing do-it-yourself clothing, because no one should ever have to live in a DIY situation. And 11 years later, I'm still sad. I'm sad because the problems not only persist on Skid Row, but they go beyond poverty and hunger. And they go beyond Skid Row even. Just replace Skid Row with the court system. Just like no one should ever have to live in a DIY situation, no one should ever have to DIY their own legal issues. Yet millions do each year. Law is one of the very few things in this world that affects every single one of us. Law is all around us. Law is in the contracts that you sign to buy your phones and your houses. Law helps us marry the people we love. Law made you think twice about rolling that stop sign this morning. It's all around us. When life is unfair, we rely on our laws and our justice system to make it fair, let's look at the example of marriage. Sometimes life is not fair and marriages don't work out. Do you know what to do in that case? Get a lawyer. That's the first thing anyone will tell you. But what if you can't get a lawyer? With attorney fees averaging from $150 to $1,000 per hour, for some of us, that's quite the investment. But for others, like the 1 in 7 Americans living below the poverty line, it's not even an option. Even for those living above the poverty line, these fees are still inaccessible. But law knows no boundaries. 71% of all Americans will face at least one civil legal problem this year. So what do you do if you can't afford an attorney? Well, here's one option. You can find an attorney that provides legal aid for reduced fees or for free. 60 million Americans qualify for these legal aid services, but only 20% of them ever actually access the legal aid they need. Why is that? To start, most people don't know that legal aid exists. Another reason is that we have a shortage of attorneys who can provide legal aid. Compared to the more than 849,000 private attorneys available to us in the United States, there are only 8,000 legal aid attorneys. That's less than one legal aid attorney for every 10,000 low-income Americans. So what do you do if you can't afford an attorney and you can't access legal aid? You still have to fight your legal battle. The only difference is you have to do it yourself. You have to DIY your case. According to studies from the George Washington University Law School and the Connecticut Law School, as many as 80% of Americans in some states will have to DIY their case and represent themselves in court this year. They will have to face the judge alone. They will have to fill out all their legal documents alone. They will have to fight important cases like an eviction to avoid homelessness. They will have to get a restraining order alone against someone who's causing them physical or emotional harm. They will have to fight alone to get custody of their children. These are big deals. And bureaucracy is unforgiving. One missed check mark on a box and you're out. You have to start the process all over again. One misread word and you could lose your whole case. Would you know how to represent yourself in court right now? Would you know which civil codes to cite, which court to go to for your specific case, which legal documents to fill out? That's like asking someone, do you know how to take out your appendix just in case? Just like no one should be taking out anyone's appendix unless they're a doctor, no one should be having to resolve their own legal issues unless they're a lawyer. Yet our system forces millions to represent themselves in court every year. And a person's ability to represent themselves in court is complicated by factors like a person's education level, the presence of a physical or learning disability, and above all, language skills. If legal jargon like unlawful detainer sounds unintelligible to the average American, imagine what it sounds like to the more than 25 million Americans who have limited English proficiency. If you can understand me right now, though it's not a guarantee you'll win your case, it is a guarantee that you'll have a far better time understanding everything than the person who struggles with English. To make matters worse, people who are forced to represent themselves in court because they can't afford an attorney, in addition to all of these factors, often face opponents who can afford an attorney. It's the average American versus the American with a law degree and years of experience under their belt. If this were to happen every thousands of cases or so, it'd be a shame. But because we have astonishing statistics like 90% of landlords have attorneys and 90% of tenants do not have attorneys in eviction cases, this is a crisis. This is a crisis of imbalance. Clearly, the person with an attorney will have a better chance at winning their case. Clearly, the person who has to represent themselves but who speaks English and doesn't have disabilities will have an easier time navigating their case. And all of these advantages happen because life is not fair. Life is allowed to be unfair, but we need to hold our courts to a higher standard. But wait a second. Don't we have rights? Doesn't the Sixth Amendment of our great Constitution guarantee us the right to legal representation? You've seen those TV shows where cops arrest someone and say, "You have the right to remain silent, ma'am. You have the right to an attorney." No. The truth is, you are not guaranteed legal representation unless it's a criminal case and unless you are at risk of losing your liberty. We are left to fend for ourselves for most of our legal issues if we can't afford any better. But you know what? That's okay, because we're adults. It's just a part of life. We know that life is unfair, and we're taught to just accept it and move on. But this injustice in our court system has a direct negative impact on our children too. Although immigration courts are facilitated by the executive branch and not the judicial branch, we see the same injustices in our immigration courts. More than 86% of immigrants, detained immigrants, are forced to represent themselves in court each year. The key word here is detained, because the law distinguishes between someone who is detained and someone who is arrested. An immigrant who is detained awaits their trial in a detention center, yet they are placed in prison-like conditions with shackles, jumpsuits, and numbers to replace their name. But still, they're detained and not arrested. Immigration law is civil law, not criminal law, so they have to face the judge alone for important cases like whether they are granted asylum or whether they go back to the violence they are fleeing from. No one should ever have to DIY a case that decides whether they live or die. No one. Especially not a child. If we as adults would have trouble facing the judge alone for big issues like this, imagine a 3-year-old. But we don't have to imagine, because it happens every day. We have a court system that forces 3-year-olds to represent themselves in immigration hearings. A 3-year-old should be afraid of monsters under their bed, not afraid for their lives. A 3-year-old should be fighting for their toys. They should not be fighting their own legal issues. I urge you to follow my dad's words of wisdom from 10 years ago on Skid Row. If this makes you sad, help them. When we think about changing a broken system, we are often inclined to think about destroying it and start anew. Start the whole thing all over again. We overthrow monarchies, we impeach presidents, we force officials to resign. We can oust people, but we can't oust systems. So how do we change a system that we depend on daily? We still need justice. Teddy Roosevelt said, "Do what you can with what you have where you are." You don't need a law degree to change our broken law system. All you need is awareness of your privileges. Do you speak a second language? You can translate for someone who has problems speaking English. Do you have a self-help center near you? You can volunteer your time there and empower self-represented litigants. Do you like kids? You can babysit for parents who need to focus on their legal issues. Do you have counseling experience? You can help someone with any type of disability navigate the court system, or even someone who's just feeling completely overwhelmed. Do you have a voice? You can draw attention to this little-known crisis in our court system. You can call your representatives to demand they take action. You can tell your neighbors. You can tell your friends. You can post on social media. You can do all of these things, and you must. By balancing the scales of justice for others, we balance them for ourselves. And if you're concerned about the injustices in your court system, then this is your call to action. Let's make liberty and justice for all a reality. Thank you.